I am Emma, 72, and my story begins on an ordinary day when my son, James, called. It had been 3 years since we last met without argument, but this call would change everything. Mom, I married Lena yesterday, James said, his voice strange. What? A wedding? Why didn't you tell me? Lena, my daughter-in-law, interrupted, her tone icy. We're married, but only special people were invited. You weren't. Her words were a slap in the face, leaving me breathless. I stood there holding the phone as if it weighed 1,000 pounds. James couldn't look at me, and Lena sat comfortably on the sofa I had bought for them, the one I imagined they would sit on during their wedding. The pale pink dress I bought for Lena's wedding still hung in my closet, along with new shoes and the illusions of being part of my son's big day. I had spent a month preparing, saving for a $1,000 wedding gift. I called my sister, Diana, in Chicago to share the news. I cleaned the house, hoping they'd come after the wedding. All my efforts lay in ruins because of 4 cruel words, only special people. After a long silence, James looked up, his voice lowering. Mom, the wedding was private, just us and the witnesses. But I knew that was a lie. I saw photos on social media, Lena's parents next to the bride and groom, her siblings toasting. I saw the white dress I had helped buy for her, and I realized I had been ruthlessly excluded. A week later, Lena called again, her voice now pleading. Emma, the rent is overdue. The landlord is pressing us for payment. If we don't pay this week, we'll be evicted. You forgot to send the money. I stood silent for a moment, remembering all the times I rushed to the bank for them, ignored my own needs to help, and ate frugally to save money for their expenses. And now, after excluding me from the most important moment of their lives, they called as if nothing had happened. Lena, I said calmly, didn't I warn you I only help special people? The silence was thick. For the first time in years, I wasn't trembling. Lena was the one who had to stay quiet. Emma, you don't understand. We've always seen you as special. You're like a second mother to me. Those words, sweet as sugar, were lies. I knew that tone. It came whenever they needed money. I had helped with the wedding dress, honeymoon, and rings, unaware I'd be excluded from the ceremony. For years, I had lived walking on eggshells, trying to be the perfect mother and mother-in-law, hoping for affection from my son. I had given more than $20,000 over 3 years, money from my retirement savings, meant for my peaceful old age. And what had I received? To be invisible on my son's wedding day. That night I cried, but not from sadness. Anger and frustration built over years of being treated like a burden. The next morning when I woke up, something inside me had changed. It wasn't just the pain of betrayal, it was something deeper, colder. I got up and looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes were as tired as always, the wrinkles on my face telling the story of years of loving without receiving anything in return. But there was something in my gaze, a firmness I had never noticed before, a determination that had been buried for too long under years of submission. I had decided I would live for myself, and starting today, I would no longer be invisible. Since that day, I was no longer the woman James and Lena knew, not because I changed to get revenge or hurt them, but because I finally realized that I had been exploited for too long. Over the past 3 years, I had accepted the role of the perfect mother, the one who was always ready to help when they needed it, without ever asking for a thank you. James, my only son, the one I raised and loved with all my heart, had now turned into a man I didn't recognize. He and Lena always had demands, desires, and I was always the one who responded, even though I knew they didn't really need me. They just needed my money. They had once said I was special to them, but those words had no value anymore. I remembered all the times I had put aside everything just to help them. The times I neglected my own needs, didn't travel, didn't spend money on things I liked, just to please them. Every time, James and Lena would call me when they needed money, and I was always ready to provide. But when I needed them, I always received coldness and indifference, especially when James's wedding took place without me being invited. The next morning, I woke up with a strange feeling. Although a little sad, I felt as if I had just been freed from a burden that had weighed on me for many years. I was so tired of living in the shadow of being financially needed by my son. This wasn't love, but a transaction. I decided to reassess everything. Just like before, I called James, but this time I had no intention of continuing as I had before. James, yesterday I received a reminder from Lena about your rent, but do you remember I said I would only help special people? I tried to keep my voice calm, not letting my emotions take over. Silence on the other end. A moment later, James spoke softly, but there was still a hint of unease. Mom, we didn't mean to upset you, but we're really struggling. Struggling? I interrupted him, but without raising my voice. How much of my money have you spent, James? You've never called to check on me, only when you need money. Don't bring these insincere apologies to me anymore. I am no longer the invisible person you can exploit. We were silent for a while, and I didn't hear any response. From that day on, I decided not to answer their calls anymore. Every call from James or Lena was just another plea for money, nothing more. And I would no longer listen, no longer tolerate their manipulation ever again. I thought about everything I had done for them. Every time they needed money, I provided, even though it affected my own life. But now, I felt like I had been deceived all these years. They didn't need me, they just needed my money. I thought about the sums I had spent on them, the rent, food, gifts, and even the times they couldn't pay me back for the help I'd provided. All of it added up to a huge number I didn't dare think about, more than $33,000. I took money from my savings, from the inheritance my husband left me, but I had never seen that money valued. Every dollar was taken for granted. But I didn't regret helping them. What I regretted was not realizing that I had lost myself in the process. I had been too focused on trying to be the perfect mother and forgotten about my own needs. The next morning, I looked at myself in the mirror and decided that I couldn't continue this way. I would no longer finance a life where I was not an important person. I would no longer sacrifice myself for people who never truly valued me. I went to the bank where I had made all the transfers for James and Lena and decided to cancel all the automatic payments I had set up. I also went to a lawyer to start learning how to protect my assets. In the end, I realized that I had to protect myself, that I was strong enough not to be manipulated anymore. I no longer needed them, and I didn't have to endure this unfair treatment any longer. After canceling the automatic payments, I began to feel like I was stepping into a new life, a life I could control, no longer worried about someone calling me to ask for money. I didn't have to do things I didn't want just to please others. For the first time in many years, I felt free. I decided that no one would overpower my life anymore. I went and changed the locks on all the doors in the house. The old locks I had given to James and Lena because I trusted them were no longer valuable to me. They had come into my house without asking, taken what they needed, and left me with the pain of betrayal. When I went to the hardware store, I asked to replace all the locks in the house, from the front door to the windows. I want the best locks, Mr. Summer, I told the store owner, a man who had known me for a long time because I often bought things for James and Lena's apartment. But this time, it was different. Mr. Summer looked at me in surprise, not asking any more questions. I didn't need to explain. I was no longer the foolish mother who had given everything for years. I didn't need to explain why I needed to protect myself. But I didn't forget the next steps in my plan. I went to meet with a security company and asked them to install surveillance cameras inside and outside the house. I didn't want them to invade my life again. This system would give me peace of mind, especially when James and Lena wouldn't stop trying to reach me. Hey, I just decided to change everything. I don't want to be the invisible mother anymore, I said. She was silent for a moment, then replied, You made the right decision. You need to live for yourself, Emma. We talked for a long time, and every word she said was like a ray of light, helping me see the path ahead more clearly. She told me about what had been happening in our family, the signs she had noticed long ago, but I had refused to see. James never really told you he loved you, Emma. He always said, Mom, help me with this. Mom, buy this for me. But never, Mom, you're important to me, or I love you. You've always been a tool, a financial means for them. Mr. Clean, I want to cancel all my automatic transactions. I want to lock my account and ensure that no one has access to it anymore, I said. He looked at me with concern. Mrs. Richter, I understand that you've always supported your family, but are you sure? Is there something going on? No, Mr. Clean. Yes, I need to protect myself, I answered with a firmness I had never known before. As I walked out of the bank, I felt lighter than ever. My assets were now mine. I was no longer tied to people who didn't value me. That feeling was incredible. I looked back at my life, and now I was ready for a new journey, a journey where I was the only one who made the decisions. A week after I had canceled the automatic payments and changed the locks, I returned home after a long day and saw 3 cars parked in front of my door. I knew right away. It was James and Lena. They weren't here because they cared about me, but because of money, because of control. Anticipating this, I felt a little anxious, but it didn't surprise me. They had come to confront me, and I wasn't backing down. I opened the door and walked into the living room. James was sitting on the sofa I had bought for them, his hands on his head as if he was suffering from something. Lena was pacing back and forth, looking like a trapped animal. And a strange man was sitting at my dining table, flipping through my papers, my personal documents, without asking for permission. James looked up, his gaze no longer carrying the innocence of the child I had loved, only fear and tension. "Mom," he said, his voice weak, "we need to talk." I scanned the room, then stopped at him. "What's there to talk about? You came into my house without asking, and now you brought a lawyer here. Why?" Lena stopped pacing, her gaze sharp as a knife. She tried to act sweet, but I knew it was all an act. "Emma," she said, "we're worried about you. We don't understand why you're doing this. Why did you cancel all the transfers? You've changed so much." For the first time, I smiled, but it was a smile full of contempt. "I've changed? No, it's you 3 who haven't changed. All of you just see me as a financial tool. You've never really cared about me, only about what I can give you." Lena seemed shocked. She didn't expect me to react this strongly. She stepped closer to me, trying to pat me on the shoulder as if to calm the situation. "Emma, we just care about you. You don't have to do this. We love you. You're important to us." I pulled away, refusing the pat, then looked straight into Lena's eyes. "If you love me, why didn't you invite me to your wedding? Why have you never called me just to ask how I'm doing, but only when you need money?" I could feel my voice tremble with anger, but I didn't let my emotions overpower me. James stood up, looking confused. "Mom, we had a private wedding, a small one, just family and a few friends. You understand, we didn't want to make you sad." His voice softened, but his anxiety was evident. "Family?" I looked him in the eyes, feeling no sense of kinship. "You consider me family? If I was family, why wasn't I there for your important moments? You didn't invite me, but now you show up here, and there's a lawyer in my house as if I've done something wrong?" The strange man, their lawyer, stood up and approached me. "Mrs. Richter, we just want to help you. James and Lena are concerned about your recent behavior. They just want to protect your interests, to make sure no one is taking advantage of you." I didn't move, just stared at him. "Well, I'm going to protect my own interests. No one has the right to invade my life anymore, not you, and certainly not some stranger like you." I turned to look at James and Lena, my eyes now as firm as steel. "You can bring your lawyer here, but don't think that I'll accept this manipulation anymore. Don't think that because you're doing this, I'll back down." The room fell silent. James looked at me, his eyes finally filled with regret, but it was too late. Lena turned away, unable to hide the anger rising in her. All 3 of them stood up and left. My heart was pounding, but I no longer felt afraid. This time, I wasn't scared. When they left my house, I stood still, breathing deeply. I knew this was just the beginning. They wouldn't give up, but I wouldn't go back. I would protect myself, no matter what. After James, Lena, and the lawyer left, I felt like I had been liberated from a part of me. But I knew this was just the beginning of a big battle. They wouldn't give up easily. I knew they would do whatever it took to regain control, and that meant I had to prepare for what was coming. The next day, I received a call from James and Lena's lawyer. His voice was cold, but I wasn't surprised. Mrs. Richter, we've filed a guardianship petition and would like to invite you for a psychological evaluation. We're concerned about your recent behavior. When I heard those words, I couldn't help but laugh. This was the first time in my life I felt so insulted, I could hardly believe it. They truly wanted to declare me mentally incompetent just because I dared to say no to them, just because I decided not to keep being their financial provider. I didn't know whether to feel angry or pity for myself. You can send all the paperwork to me by email, and I will have my lawyer review it. I have nothing more to say to you, I said, hanging up the phone, feeling as if I had been trampled, but at the same time telling myself I wouldn't let them ruin the rest of my life. The next day, I met with Mr. Weber, the lawyer I had chosen to protect me in this battle. Mr. Weber was a very professional man, and I could feel the trust when working with him. He looked at me and said, "Emma, they'll do whatever they can to regain control over your finances, but you need to be ready to fight because this isn't just about money, it's about your freedom." We spent the entire day preparing. Mr. Weber helped me gather all the evidence of the money I had given to James and Lena over the past 3 years, all the times I had been exploited. We also prepared a strategy to protect my rights, including requesting an independent psychological evaluation to prove that I was mentally competent and capable of managing my finances. That evening, I felt more ready than ever. I was no longer the fearful mother. I was a strong, decisive woman. I would not let them take my life away from me. I wouldn't let them overpower me any longer. But still, I couldn't shake the feeling of anxiety when I thought about James and Lena possibly coming back with more legal threats. They wouldn't give up easily, but this time, I wasn't backing down. A week later, I received a court notice for the appointment regarding the psychological evaluation. I wasn't surprised that they were continuing with their plan. At this point, I just felt tense and more determined than ever. I began to see their true intentions, not because I needed care, but because they wanted to seize my assets. Then the day of the evaluation arrived. I wasn't panicked. I was ready. When the psychologist asked me about the changes in my life, I answered calmly and clearly. "Mrs. Emma, we have received information indicating that you have changed significantly and no longer want to continue providing financial support to your family. Can you explain why?" the doctor asked. I looked up, not hesitating for a second. "I no longer want to live a life where I have to sacrifice myself for people who don't appreciate me. That's why." The doctor made a note in his file, but I could feel the relief inside me. I didn't need to prove that I was doing the right thing. I had known for a long time that letting go of blind sacrifice was something I needed to do. At the end of the day, when I returned home, I received a text from James. He wrote, "Mom, we need to talk. We can't keep going on like this." But I didn't respond. I looked at the phone, then went back to my work, no longer worried, no longer thinking about whether I should reply or not. I had done what I needed to do, and now I just needed to keep living my life. After the psychological evaluation, I felt much lighter. Although the legal battle was far from over, I knew I was on the right track. Everything seemed to be slowly falling into place again. I no longer feared, and I didn't feel guilty every time I rejected James and Lena's requests. I had decided that I wouldn't let them drag me down anymore. They could no longer control my life. One morning, I woke up and decided to do something I had put off for many years. I wore my favorite outfit, the one I had always felt guilty buying because I thought I didn't have the right to spend on myself when James and Lena still needed money. I no longer worried about spending money on myself. This was the first time I felt I deserved to do that. I went to the beauty salon, a place I had been to a few times, but always had to cancel because of emergencies from James and Lena. Today, I wasn't going to cancel my appointment. I had decided that I would take care of myself. I deserved to look good. "Hello, Mrs. Emma. You look so much better today," Cynthia, my hairstylist, complimented when I walked in. She was the only one among my friends who really listened to me without judgment or asking for anything. "Thank you, Cynthia. Today, I've decided to take a little time for myself," I told her, feeling a warm joy spread through me. During the haircut and manicure, I thought about everything that had happened. I no longer had to worry about calls asking for money. I didn't have to worry about continuing to be the provider for people who only saw me as a financial tool. My life was now mine, and I decided I would live it to the fullest. After the beauty treatment, I went to a quiet cafe to enjoy a cup of coffee. I sat there looking out the window and feeling the fresh air. I had spent my whole life on family, on James and Lena, but now I could spend time on myself, on the things I loved. That afternoon, I decided to call some old friends I had forgotten about over the years. I didn't have to listen to James and Lena's empty apologies anymore. I wanted to rebuild real relationships not controlled by money or exploitation. I called an old friend, Maria. "Hey, Maria, long time no see. I'd love to have dinner with you," I said, and we arranged to meet up on the weekend. When I ended the call, I felt like I was starting over. New relationships, new opportunities, a life where I didn't have to sacrifice myself for anyone anymore. This was the time for me to live for myself, and I would do it. The next day, I decided to meet with Mr. Weber, my lawyer, to check everything for the upcoming legal battle. I had prepared myself for any situation. The people in my family who I once loved were now my enemies, but I knew I wasn't alone. I had the support of true friends, those who had witnessed my transformation and understood what I was fighting for. When I entered Mr. Weber's office, he looked at me and smiled lightly. "Emma, I can see you've changed so much. You're stronger than ever." I smiled. Yes, I made the right decision. It's time for me to live for myself. The day I received the court notice about the guardianship petition from James and Lena, the feeling inside me wasn't fear. It was resolve. They had taken the matter to court, trying to declare me mentally incompetent so they could take control of my finances. But I was ready for this fight. The day of the hearing, I felt like a warrior preparing for the final battle. I wore my black business suit, the one I always felt confident in. This wasn't just any courtroom session. This was a fight for not just my assets, but my respect and my right to live my own life. I arrived at the courthouse with Mr. Weber, my lawyer, who had been by my side throughout this process. He always believed in me and helped me prepare thoroughly. "Emma, today we're going to prove that you are fully capable and that your decisions are completely reasonable," he said, gently patting my shoulder as a gesture of encouragement. When I walked into the courtroom, I saw James and Lena. James was wearing an expensive suit, his face tight with anxiety and concern. Lena, however, didn't look at me, but I could feel her cold stare. They had done everything they could to regain control of my finances, and I knew they wouldn't give up easily. Their lawyer stood up first and began his speech with a persuasive tone. "Your Honor, Mrs. Emma Richter has shown a significant change in her behavior. She no longer helps her son and daughter-in-law, no longer cares about her family. This represents a substantial change, not due to circumstances, but due to a decline in her mental capacity. We request that the court consider placing her under guardianship." Hearing those words was like a slap to my face. They were actually trying to turn me into someone incapable of making decisions so they could take control of my assets, but I wasn't going to let them succeed. When their lawyer finished, it was Mr. Weber's turn. He stood up and looked directly at the judges before beginning his argument. "Your Honor, we have ample evidence to show that Mrs. Emma Richter is not only mentally competent, but also entirely clear-headed in her decisions. The decisions she made, including halting financial support to her son and daughter-in-law, are fully justified and made with careful consideration." Mr. Weber presented expert testimonies, doctors who confirmed that I was perfectly capable of managing my finances. We also had witnesses, friends, neighbors, and people who had seen my transformation over the past few months. These people testified that I had changed for the better, that I was now a stronger, more independent woman, no longer bound by the manipulation of my family. After presenting all the evidence, Mr. Weber turned to me with a look of encouragement. I stood up and walked to the witness stand. This time, I would speak my truth. "Your Honor," I began, my voice firm but full of emotion, "I do not regret the decisions I've made. I spent my entire life worrying about my son and daughter-in-law, but in the end, I realized they didn't need me. They only needed my money. I am not invisible in their lives anymore. I am a woman who deserves to be loved and respected, not a walking ATM." I looked into James and Lena's eyes. James couldn't bring himself to look at me, while Lena could only grit her teeth, her face filled with hatred. But I didn't feel weak. I stood there, stronger and more confident than ever. The court proceedings continued with testimonies from more witnesses. Some of my friends from the garden club, like Maria and Cynthia, came forward to testify about the change in me. They confirmed that I was now a strong, independent woman who lived her life for herself, no longer trapped by my family's exploitation. When the hearing ended, I didn't know what the outcome would be, but I knew that I had done my best. I was no longer the weak woman living for the satisfaction of others. I had stood up to protect myself. 2 hours in the courtroom felt like an eternity. The questions, the arguments, the justifications from James and Lena no longer mattered to me. I had done what I needed to do, and now I just hoped the truth would prevail. Every minute that passed, I felt like I was fighting for my entire life, and I knew that no matter the outcome, I would never regret what I had done. When the judge came back from deliberation, I could feel the tension in the courtroom. Everyone was waiting for the verdict. Both James and Lena were silent, their faces tense, as if they already knew something wasn't right. Then the judge stood up, his expression stern. After reviewing all the evidence and testimonies from both parties, I can confirm that Mrs. Emma Richter is fully competent to make decisions about her finances, the judge began. While her children have the right to be concerned, their actions over the past period, particularly the guardianship request, were unreasonable. They have clearly exploited her. When those words were spoken, an overwhelming sense of relief flooded through me. I couldn't believe what I had just heard, but I knew I had won. I had regained control over my life. Given all these factors, the guardianship petition for Mrs. Emma Richter is denied. I also advise her family to reconsider how they approach their relationship with her and to find a more reasonable way to rebuild it. The courtroom fell silent for a moment. James and Lena didn't say a word. They just stood there, staring at me with looks of frustration and anger. But in my eyes, they were nothing more than people who had lost this battle. I hadn't just protected my assets, I had protected my freedom, my right to live my life. When I walked out of the courtroom, Mr. Weber walked with me, his eyes filled with pride. Emma, you did an amazing job. This victory is not just for you, but for everyone who wants to regain autonomy in their lives. I didn't say anything, but inside, I felt an overwhelming sense of triumph. How long had it been since I had felt like this? I had taken control of my life, and that was the most important thing. Now, I could start anew, live the life I wanted, without worrying about the manipulation of anyone else. After the trial, a part of me felt like I had been reborn. The burdens I had carried for so many years had been lifted. I was no longer the one constantly providing for the demands of James and Lena. No longer a mother who only existed to please children who saw me as a financial tool. I felt free, and that was the best feeling I had ever known. I began my new life, no longer worried about calls, texts asking for financial help from James and Lena. I returned to the hobbies I had abandoned for so many years. I started painting again, a hobby I had given up when my life was controlled by family. I joined an art class where I could freely create without thinking about anyone else. New friends, like Cynthia and Maria, had become an important part of my life. I no longer felt isolated in my home, no longer the invisible person who only existed to care for others. The genuine conversations, the laughter, the walks in the park, all of it brought me the peace I had never had before. One day, when I was sitting in a cafe with Maria, she looked at me and said, "Emma, you've changed so much. You're really living again." Her words touched me. I knew I had found myself again. I was no longer the mother or wife who only knew how to give without receiving. I had found myself, and that was the most valuable thing. I also began to travel, something I had neglected for years because I was always busy with the demands of my family. I went to Paris, the place I had always dreamed of visiting, and even spent time exploring museums where I could immerse myself in art without thinking about other people's problems. This freedom was incredible. I didn't have to worry about whether I could maintain this lifestyle or what I needed to do to please others. I had learned to love myself, to cherish the moments I had never allowed myself to enjoy before. But I also knew I couldn't just live in my own world forever. I started volunteering, helping those who needed support. I felt that I could contribute to the community without sacrificing myself. One evening, I was sitting at the cafe, sipping a hot cup of tea and thinking about the days that had passed. I realized that every moment in life was valuable, and I couldn't waste it just for people who didn't appreciate me. From now on, I would live my life, not in debt, not worrying about someone's demands, and most importantly, I would live with joy and freedom, which I truly deserved. I no longer felt guilty for turning down James and Lena's requests. They had chosen their own path, and I had chosen mine. I no longer had to work to earn their acceptance, no longer had to buy their affection with money. I had rediscovered true love, love for myself. A month after the trial, I felt like my life had turned a complete page. I was no longer the woman James and Lena once knew. I was no longer the one who lived to please them, the one they could exploit for their financial needs. I had regained my freedom, and that was a feeling I had never thought I could experience. One day, I decided to clean my house one last time, not because I felt obligated, but because I wanted my living space to truly reflect the change in my life. This house had once been where I sacrificed so much, where I spent all my time and money helping James and Lena, but now it was mine, a place where I could find peace and freedom. As I cleaned the dining table I had often used to calculate transfers to James and Lena, I felt a sense of liberation. What I had done in the past wasn't wrong, but now I realized that I couldn't keep living for others at the expense of myself. This life was mine, and I would live it on my own terms. I decided to sell this house and move to a smaller apartment near the city center. I had passed up many opportunities in life because I had always put my family first. But now I wanted to dedicate time to myself, to the things I loved, and to those who truly appreciated me. I no longer wanted to live in the shadow of unconditional sacrifice. As I prepared to move, I received a call from Diana. She asked me about my plans after leaving this house. "You've done so well, Emma," Diana said. "Now you can live your own life without worrying about what others think." When I stepped into my new apartment, the first feeling I had was relief. This was my space, a space where I didn't have to sacrifice to please anyone else. I could decorate it however I wanted, live the way I wanted, and feel happy with what I had. One evening, while sitting on the balcony of my new apartment, I looked out at the starry sky and felt like I was being reborn. Although I had lost my relationship with James and Lena, I no longer felt sad about it. I had lost them, but I had found myself, and that was all that mattered. "Good evening, Emma." The doorbell rang, and I opened the door to find a new friend from the garden club, Maria. She had come to visit me, bringing a beautiful bouquet she had just cut from her garden. "Congratulations, Emma," Maria said as she handed me the flowers. "This is the beginning of a new chapter in your life." I smiled and accepted the bouquet. "Thank you, Maria. This is a life I truly deserve, a life full of freedom and hope." After Maria left, I sat alone in my apartment, looking out the window at the twinkling lights outside. I knew that my life would never be the same again. Although I still remembered the times I had with James and Lena, I was ready to move forward. I no longer had to live to please others. I would live for myself. When I closed my eyes that night, I no longer worried about the future. My future was now a blank canvas, and I had the power to paint it however I wanted. The sacrifices I had made before no longer mattered. What mattered now was that I had taken back control of my life, and that was the freedom I had always dreamed of.